There are those who view the horizon and think, well, I guess that's the end. And then there are those who view the horizon and think, I want to go past that. And I want to do whatever I have to do to get there. That second kind of person is the kind of person who changes the world. That second type of person is called a disruptor. And I want each one of you to become a disruptor. The world needs you to become a disruptor. I recently wrote a book on the topic of disruption. And in that book, I wrote 2 definitions for what it means to become a disruptor. And I have one of those on the screen here that's most pertinent for today. It says, disruptors dismantle accepted norms and forge unimagined futures. Disruptors dismantle accepted norms and forge unimagined futures. Now let me be really clear about one point here. A disruptor is different from a destructor because destructors dismantle accepted norms and leave nothing in its place. But a disruptor will always leave something better where they took something else down. So when we think about disruptors, we think about the kind of person who at one point looked at the moon and thought, you know, I think we should take a giant piece of metal that weighs thousands of pounds and we should strap bombs to it. And we should light it all on fire and shoot it and land it on the moon. But then when we get there, we shouldn't just leave. No, that's too easy. We should get out in fancy spacesuits and walk around and take pictures of each other and even stick a flag in the grounds. That type of thinking and then execution comes from a disruptor. And then there's the kind of people 70 years ago in this country and on this campus who walked around and saw different water fountains for black people and white people, and who went in restaurants and on buses and saw that there were different rules depending on the color of your skin. And they thought, you know, this isn't okay. There's an accepted norm here that needs to be dismantled and an unimagined future that needs to replace it. And because of those disruptors, I can tell my 7 and 5 and 2-year-old today about those stories of separate bathrooms and different rules on buses and in restaurants, and they can't believe that was ever even a reality. And then someone at some point, when they were building the first computers and they took up an entire room, someone was discontent to stop there and say, well, look, we got a computer. It takes up a whole room, but we did it. We made it. No, they continued to disrupt and create unimagined futures until those computers were in people's homes. And even then, they didn't stop. They said, what if we took this technology and this power and we actually put it into people's pockets so they could have this technology in their hand and carry it around all day with them? And each one of us benefits now because someone dismantled an accepted norm and created an unimagined future. But it's easy to look at those stories in history books and to ask, but those are like historical moments in time. Of course, those people dismantled accepted norms, and of course, those people created unimagined futures. But what about regular, normal people? People like the guy at H-E-B buying produce, or the girl in the car next to us at the red light that's singing at the top of her lungs. I mean, is it possible that those kind of people, people like me and people like you, just regular people, no offense, actually have the capacity to do this disruption that you're speaking of? That was the question I asked myself. Is it just these famous, significant people that are being disruptive, or is this something just regular, ordinary people can do? And so I set out to try to find the answer to that. And what I found was that there are so many ordinary people disrupting for good, creating unimagined futures that they couldn't possibly all fit into this 18-minute speech. In fact, they couldn't possibly fit into the 125-page book I just sent to my publisher last month. There's stories like the nursing home in Seattle. So this nursing home is, all of you have been in a nursing home, I'm sure, right? Nursing homes are tough places to visit, even harder places to live. I mean, there's the bright lights, kind of like right now, actually. There's the hard floor, kind of like right now, actually. And then the smells, not right now. But the smells, it's hard. If you've been in a nursing home, you can smell right now. You can remember that smell that I'm talking about. And someone 25 years ago at a nursing home in Seattle was so uncomfortable with the accepted norm of the kind of place that nursing homes were that they decided they had to do something about it. They had to create an unimagined future. And so they brought a daycare into the nursing home. And so these old people are playing with these young kids, and the young kids are playing with the old people. And as that happens, something else begins to happen. It's not just a nice place with more laughter than before, but they begin to realize the old people living in the nursing home are happier. And they're not losing their memories as quickly. And the parents of the kids who are attending the preschool, the daycare in the nursing home, are telling the workers that their kids are kinder, they're more empathetic, they're less scared of people not like them. What's ironic to me about that story, that was 25 years ago. Why isn't every nursing home in America have a daycare center in it? And what it reminds me is that even when someone's been past the horizon, and we can see them go past the horizon, it still feels really scary to go there ourselves. And then there's the story of the restaurant in Toronto. So there was a guy named Unjan who was a manager at a Boston's Pizza. And this Boston's Pizza happened to have several deaf customers who were regulars. And so Unjan would see these customers come in, and no one spoke sign language. No one knew any sign language in the entire restaurant. So every time the deaf customers came in, they just had to point at the menu. No communication. You can forget a special order. They just had to point, nod their heads. Well, this bothered Unjan so much that he actually went and taught himself rudimentary sign language. Just basic sign language. So he could show these deaf customers, hey, I see you. You matter to me. Which is cool in and of itself. But then what he discovered as he began to sort of deep dive into this world of the deaf is that it's really hard for deaf people to get good jobs. Now, if you think about it, it makes sense. But most of us who are hearing, we take that for granted. So Unjan created a restaurant in Toronto called Signs. And the restaurant was going to be fully staffed by deaf people. And when you came into the restaurant, if you were a hearing person, you were going to order by sign language. And you had the cheat sheet in your menu that showed you how to order the hamburger or the Dr. Pepper. Or probably no Dr. Pepper in Toronto, unfortunately. But whatever it was you were going to order, they had the cheat sheet right there and on the walls. So I reached out to Unjan when I saw his story to ask if I could include him in my book. And he wrote back and he said, unfortunately, Chris, I don't think you're going to want to include me because the restaurant just closed down after almost 3 years. It was so expensive to train the staff because not only had they not been waiters and waitresses and hosts and hostesses, they'd never really worked, many of them, ever. And I said, actually, I want to include your story even more now because I want to make it clear to anyone who reads these stories of disruption that disruption is not defined on a paper that tells you how much money you did or didn't make. It's defined by being the kind of person who has the courage and the passion and the imagination and the guts to create something when something didn't exist. And you did that. And I hope that people will read and hear your story and become even more courageous and try to do things like you did to help people that we forget sometimes need help. And then there's my favorite story. 14-year-old boy named Easton LaChapelle. So Easton's from a small town in Colorado, so small that when he graduated high school several years later, he only had 27 kids in his graduating class. The nearest Radio Shack was an hour away. So Easton tinkers a lot in his room. And he tinkers with Legos and fishing wire, fishing string. and he builds a robotic hand. Well, he's at a conference, at a table, showing people this robotic hand he's made when he's 14, and he meets a 7-year-old girl, and she has a prosthetic arm. Well, she's fascinated with what he's created, and he's fascinated with her, and she tells him in the course of their conversation that her prosthetic arm cost her family $80,000 and almost bankrupted them. And he thought, 14, he thought, there's got to be a better way. Someone has to dismantle that accepted norm and create an unimagined future, and so he got after it. Well, Easton's 21 now. He chose not to go to college because he said it seemed like a waste of time, just take him longer to get where he wanted to go. NASA invited him to come in about a year ago to be part of an internship of a program to see if he would actually help build the robotic arm of a robotic astronaut that they were going to send to space. And the prosthetic arm he was working on building to help little girls like the one he met, that turned out pretty well. It's now open source, available on the internet. And for $400 of materials, you can actually print it at home on a 3D printer. Each one of those people took an accepted norm. Something we all said, well, that's just the way it is. And they did something about it. They put something better in its place. My story of disruption started all the way back in elementary school with many, many parent-teacher conferences. Mom, Dad, sorry about that. It continued, though, when I was 19 and I ran for mayor of College Station. And then when I began directing a camp for inner-city kids, and then it continued on when I started the BCS Marathon and all these other crazy things. But my most significant moment of disruption came 7 years ago, when I read a book about child trafficking in Ghana, Africa, a story of little boys and little girls from poor families whose families were so desperate and so confused and so unsure of what the future might hold that they would sell their children into the fishing industry to work all day on wooden boats on the world's largest man-made lake. And so I Googled the author of that book that I had read, and I called her, and I asked her if I could go to Africa with her. A few months later, I showed up there. And a few months after that, I quit my job and started Mercy Project, an organization that I hoped might be able to help some of these kids. And what Mercy Project's been able to do in Ghana is disruption. We've gone into these fishing villages where these kids live and where they work all day, 14 hours a day, young kids, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. And we've taught the fishermen who own the kids a new and better way to fish. So they no longer need the kids anymore. So that they'll voluntarily release the children to go back into their families. So we took an accepted norm in Ghana and we've created an unimagined future. And so far, that unimagined future has resulted in almost 100 children being rescued from these fishing villages, out of trafficking, reunited back with their families where they're attending school, and beginning to dream of their own previously unimagined futures. And it just so turns out, this was not planned, it just so turns out that even today, April 22nd, 2017, my staff in Ghana walked out of a small fishing village called Kodome with 7 children who yesterday were slaves. And those little kids ranging in age from 8 to 16, including one little girl named Lizzie, who told my staff just today when she got away from her master and began to feel safe to communicate, she told her master, "It's been so long since I've been home that I don't even think I'll recognize my mother. But I'm excited to see her again because I know she loves me and I know that I'll be able to go to school instead of having to work." You see, this kind of disruption is the kind of disruption that all of you are capable of. There's nothing unique or special about me. So I came up with sort of what I call my map of disruption. So how does the ordinary person like you, because the truth is, every one of you in this room, you have some accepted norm that bothers you. There's something in the world that you don't like, sometimes lots of things. It might be something that feels small, like a relationship that's not right, or something in your own town. Maybe it's that you have lived on your street a long time and you don't know your neighbors. Maybe it's that there's kids in your city who go to bed hungry every night or who don't know how to read because their parents don't have the time to teach them, or are incapable of reading themselves. I don't know what that accepted norm is for you. This is the beauty of all of us being such different people. But you have some accepted norms, something that bothers you. And so if you're going to become a disruptor, and I sincerely hope you will, if you're going to become a disruptor, the first thing you have to do is to make a commitment that thing that bothers you, you're going to actually start talking about it and not sort of push it away. You're going to make a commitment that you're going to do something about that accepted norm that just doesn't sit right. But look, lots of people make commitments. We see it every year on January 1st, so we can't stop there. The second thing we have to do is to make an action plan. And this is exactly as it seems. We say, okay, if I'm going to do something about this accepted norm, if I'm going to dismantle it, if I'm going to create an unimagined future, what exactly needs to happen for me to do that? And sometimes it's really straightforward. It's 1, 2, 3 steps that you know you need to do. Sometimes it's much more complex. Our work in Ghana, we had one action step when we began, and that was we have to figure out why kids are being trafficked. We don't even know why this is happening. So who are we to march into this country and try to tell them what to do without even knowing the root of the problem? What we found was that it was an economic problem. And so then we began to implement economic solutions. But one action step in an action plan has turned into dozens over the last 7 years. And those will continue to be added to our list. So you create this action plan. The last one, the most important one. Lots of people make commitments. Some people make action plans. Very few people persist to transformation. And when I looked at these stories of disruptors in this book, and as I researched them and studied them and looked at their life paths over and over and over, I saw the same thing. The difference between them and most people is they were willing to persist. Persist, persist, persist until the change they wanted to see came about. Until their unimagined future came to life. It was 800 days in Ghana from the day we started Mercy Project to the day we walked out with our first rescued child. 800 days of waking up every day and wondering if we were ever going to accomplish our goal. Every single one of you, without me even having to know you, has the gifts and the intelligence and the creativity to disrupt for good. And I sincerely hope you will use it to do something to create an unimagined future. Thank you.